Okay, so when Jeanette asked me to come here today, and I found out that she wanted me to actually teach a class, I want to tell you I really didn't know if I didn't feel like that was appropriate. I felt like this is a time where we're supposed to honor LaFoy, and we're supposed to sort of invigorate everybody and get them excited about what the future is to hold, and everybody should be motivated to get out there and stand, right? And I kept thinking, wow, standing up and teaching a class, that's going to be like a major buzzkill. And I kept thinking, you know what? I don't know any better way to portray who LaVoy was than to teach a class. And so I'm what I call an original text historian. What I teach you comes not from my opinion or from my interpretations, but from the history and the facts itself. And so I want to present to you why I'm here today, from the original source. And you can't hear that, can you? Of course, because... And you know, we did pray over this, so I don't even understand. I mean, I'm at 100% here. It's all the way. It's coming out. Oh, we gotta turn it up over there then, I guess.
Is that all the way up?
All right, here's what we're gonna do.
It's in the video window.
Sorry, I am really sorry about this. This is why I hate using videos. Just put the mic up to the speaker. You're gonna try again? We actually tested this out, so there's no reason why this shouldn't be working. I have it all the way up on all platforms.
The video window bar.
Yeah, no, I got that too. So right here, it's all the way up.
The one all the way over on your left.
Now I'm gonna be sick. All right, let me ask you something. Can you hear that?
No.
Yeah, I have it, but it doesn't go to the separate.
We'll let you tell us what you said.
No, now it's too complicated. All right, so here we're just gonna go.
Chris, we have an IT tech from Oklahoma here.
All right, whatever.
Robert Giles.
Maybe she can. He? Okay. Hold on a second. I'm gonna try one more thing and then we're gonna quit. So, because I'm running out of time here. Give me this. No, it's too late for that. We're not going through all of this. This is. How many of you believe that the devil owns the power? Is the prince of the power of the air? Okay. So now we have selected. You see, I have selected the headphones section.
try to do a little bit of it. I'm calling this part 1.
So you're gonna have to turn that up over there, I think.
Here on my ranch. It's beautiful out here. It's time that we do something more than just talk about freedom and about freedom. So I want to educate Cowboy Stand for Freedom. This is very important.
So you're gonna have to listen real close, because this is apparently as good as it's gonna get. Oops. Here we go. No, I don't want that.
Cowboy Stand for Freedom.
Now it's bad again.
This is very
All right. So basically what we have here is a video of Lavoie explaining why he does what he does. You can see why he does what he does because he wanted to educate. And that's what I wanted to sort of bring to you today, was the fact that we are here because Lavoie wanted to educate. I believe that that's why Lavoie was seen as a threat from the beginning, because he was a very powerful educator. I'm up there, right, Deb? All right. And so I don't know of any better way to bring this class, or no, any better reason to bring this class than because I believe that if Lavoie was here today, he would be teaching about the Constitution. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through this class because how many of you want to stand? As I travel, the most asked question that I get is, what do we do? How many of you like to know what to do? See, I think what causes people to hesitate to stand a lot of times is this lack of foundation, this lack of understanding of what needs to happen. What do I do? How do I stand? What is it that I need to do to play my part? You see, for so many years, so many decades and so many generations, we have been taught that it's just, the Constitution is just too complicated. You can't possibly know what it means. Come on, now that's why we have the Supreme Court. Because obviously we have these intellectually advanced people who get to wear black robes and tell us what everything in life means. It's too complicated for you. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. And after generations and generations and generations of being taught like that, we get to a position where we don't know what we should be doing because we don't understand what needs to be done, and we don't understand how we're supposed to be operating anymore. America has become so federal-centric that even in our conservative circles, in our conservative politics, we have people who do nothing but run to the federal government to fix their problems. But that's not who we are. In spite of what the CIA had been publishing for many years until we actually exposed it a couple of months ago, we are not a federal presidential republic. How many of you saw that? The FBI had on their fact book page that America was a federal presidential republic. But I think that's just an indication of how we've become to think in America. Remember, it's the conservatives that went to the federal government to define marriage. It was the conservatives who invited government in the marriage first, not the liberals or the progressives or anybody. It was the conservatives. We ran to the federal government and say, define this for us, when they had no authority to do that. But what we forgot, because we don't teach the proper history anymore, we don't teach who we are anymore, we forgot that the power given to one administration remains in the next. And you never know in the next one if they're going to believe what you believe now. Now, government, it always grows exponentially. So we asked an administration administration to define marriage for us because we saw the administration believed in the conservative Christian way, and they're going to define marriage the way we want them to. But we forgot that that power would remain into the next administration. And the next administration, they had the power to define marriage. And then how did that work out for us? But then not only that, forgetting that power expands exponentially always in government, we ask the government to define marriage. Now they're not just defining marriages, they're defining bathrooms, they're defining wedding cakes, they're defining photography. You see, that's why we were created as a constitutional republic. So that the people would know the boundaries of government. See, the Constitution wasn't just a limitation on the government. It was to be a reminder to the people of the barriers of government so we didn't invite them out. Because when you invite the lion out of the cage, don't be surprised when it bites your head off. In one of the clips that I had made in this video, LaVoy says, I'm not anti-government. They keep me calling me anti-government. I am not anti-government. Can I just tell you I stand with LaVoy on that? In spite of being on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list 2 years in a row as an anti-government extremist group, I am not anti-government. Lawless government. But if we're going to get government back into its limited and defined box as it was created, then we, the people, must understand those barriers. We, the people, must understand the checks and balances. So do you think the federal government is out of control? So what needs to happen? We need to wake up. Nothing needs to happen except that America have a revolution of the mind. We need to remember how we were created, where we came from, who we're supposed to be, who the federal government is supposed to be. What is the check? What is the greatest check and balance between the federal government's power? Our framers taught us. What I find most interesting is even in the legal fields, because I know I've had several legal colleagues up here teaching today. I can tell you they'll probably amen me on this one, but we don't teach the Constitution in law school anymore. We don't. We teach constitutional law, which teaches our law students, who will be our future judges and lawyers, that they know more about the Constitution than the men who wrote it. Because after all, we have cell phones and computers, so we're technologically advanced, so we must be intellectually superior. So we have to go back and tell the founders what they meant when they wrote the Constitution, because after all, they were too stupid to know for themselves. I've even had colleagues tell me, and scholars say, it's impossible to know what the founders meant when they wrote the Constitution. What? Really? Those people wrote reams and reams and reams about what they did and why they did it. My goodness, the University of Chicago has a resource called the Founders Constitution, where they go through the Constitution, article, section, and clause, and link to the documents that the founders wrote about those sections. How can we claim we can't know what they meant when it's right there, even in the University of Chicago? But we got to get rid of this idea that we can't know. I mean, not just them, us. Our Constitution was written in such a way that everybody was supposed to be able to understand it. The common man on the street in 1789 who had no cell phone, who had no laptop computer, could pick up the Constitution, know what it meant, and knew how government was supposed to be applied. How can we walk around with this superiority complex and yet still spout the fact that we can't know when the guy walking down the street in 1789 knew it all? We got to train ourselves to start asking the right questions. We got to get back to basics because we have failed to teach the right things for a very, very long time. We have failed to become an educated people. Samuel Adams said, "No people will tamely surrender their liberties nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved. But on the contrary, when the people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders." If we're going to fix this, there's a couple things we need to do. We need to first understand that Donald Trump is not going to save America. Okay, that should have been a really loud applause out there. We need to understand that the office of the president is a very limited office in power, and the power to run America does not rest in the executive branch. Woo! Donald Trump was not elected to be king. He was not elected to be Messiah. He was elected to be the President of the United States, and he is limited in his capacity by the delegation of power through the Constitution. And saving America is not in Article 2. We need to understand that although we've been in the habit over the last 8 years of pointing fingers at the President of the United States, 99.9% of the problems in America did not come from Obama. They came from our conservative Republican House of Representatives. It was Congress that kept funding all of these things. It was Congress that made all these laws. And it is Congress that stood by and did nothing when Anna Brown in her courtroom said, "You can't read the Constitution here." Because it is still today the constitutional authority for Congress to impeach judges for bad behavior. And I think if you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution and then deny it, that is the very definition of bad behavior. We got to understand that the judiciary was established to be the least power in federal government, not the greatest. The Constitution does not delegate to the Supreme Court the authority to be the ultimate arbiters of what is constitutional and what is not. That is a power they invented and created on their own and bestowed upon themselves. Judges don't make law, they issue opinions. And their opinions are bound and limited by the authority delegated to them by the Constitution. We've got to stop looking at them as if they are an oligarchy of kings and queens. Because we threw off kings a whole long time ago. Now, if we're going to get to these conclusions, if we're going to get to these solid understandings, these understandings that are not just my opinion, based in history, based in text, based in the words of those who created the Constitution themselves, then we've got to start over. We've got to start building a proper foundation so we know, so we can have that boldness. Do you know why Lavoie had that boldness? Because he knew how it was supposed to work. and nobody could rattle him because he was on a firm foundation. I want every single person in this room, in the few minutes that I have with you this evening, to get a feeling of that firm foundation, a feeling that will give you that boldness, because if we're going to leave here different than we came in, we have to know what we need to do, and we have to be confident in that. It's not just enough to sit here. It's not just enough to come and show your support. It is only enough when you stand. Now, I am not here to teach you my opinions. I am not here to teach you my interpretations. I have reporters and people who ask me that all the time. What do you think about this? My thoughts are irrelevant. I will tell you that again. I don't want you to believe a single word that I'm about to tell you here today. I want you to go home and find out these facts on your own. I want you to research these things. I want you to become the expert too, because I am confident that what I am giving you is fact and history and cannot be disputed, because that's who we are. I'm not here to teach you. I am here to facilitate the lessons that our framers put into writing for you. Do we need to ask the Supreme Court, or do we need to ask the people who actually wrote the document? So the first thing we need to understand is this proper placement of power. If we're going to fix what's wrong, we all agree that the federal government is out of control. If we're going to fix that, then we have to understand what is our greatest guard of our liberty. Because that was the single thing that the founders of our constitutional republic were concerned with securing, just one thing. They had different ideas on how to achieve that, but they had one goal. The preamble tells us that, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. One thing, securing liberty. What is our greatest guard in securing our liberty? Well, how about we ask the legislators of the state of Virginia in 1799? These would be the people who were in the delegation that wrote the Constitution, that debated, that voted in for Virginia to become part of the constitutional republic. They knew how it was supposed to work because they were there when it was being drafted, and they were part of the ratification. And they're about to tell us our greatest guard. Your greatest guard of your liberty is not the Supreme Court, it is not Donald Trump, and it is not your congressman. The greatest guard of your liberty is your state and local government. And that's how it's supposed to work. But again, you don't have to take my word for it. Look at these legislators. See, in 1799, I don't know if this is really hard to believe, but in 1799, we already have a federal government that's trying to come out of its limited and defined box, and we have the states who are trying to push it back in. And these legislators in Virginia are begging the people, please help us do our job. Because the number one duty of your state and local government, the number one obligation of your state and local government is not economic improvement. It is not education. It is not resource management. It is not business regulation. The number one obligation of your state and local government is to guard the sovereignty of the state. It's the only way you can defend the Constitution. Because if your state is sovereign, you have prosperity. You have peace. You manage your resources. You have everything that you need in your own disposal if you are sovereign. Look at this. It would be deceitful. We are unwilling to shrink from our representative responsibilities, and it would be deceitful in us who have been entrusted with guarding the sovereignty of the state. Why do they have to guard the sovereignty of the state? They tell us because we took that oath. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Before we leave here this evening, I hope that you will understand from their guidance that if your state is not sovereign, the Constitution is destroyed. There is no Constitution, there is no constitutional republic if Oregon is not sovereign. Now, what is the greatest threat on the sovereignty of your state? Federal encroachments. That's what they said. And we understand they're telling the people, we've got to warn you of these federal encroachments, even though the federal government has become very artful at making you think you need to have them. This is 1799. They said, these encroachments may be clothed with the pretext of necessity. Because you know we must have national health care, right? Of course we must have national health care. If we don't have national health care, we're all going to die. You're laughing because you realize we're all going to die, right? Federal health care just allows the federal government to decide who, when, where, and how you die. But they said not only these encroachments be disguised by the pretext of necessity, they'll be clothed in the arguments of expediency, because you know you have to pass the bill so you can read the bill. Sound familiar, anybody out there?
Yes.
Okay, so can I remind you now that this was 1799 and not 2017? Why does it sound the same? Because human nature never changes. It's why Patrick Henry said, I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that's the lamp of experience. I know no way to judge the future but by the past. Those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat its mistakes, because history always repeats. And here we are doing the same thing, because we have forgotten that the greatest threat to liberty, the greatest threat to the sovereignty of the state is federal encroachments. Every dollar that your state takes, any dollar, just $1 that your state and local government takes from the federal government, destroys your sovereignty. Because who pays the piper dictates the tune, right? Because $1, then all of a sudden you have people believing and legislators preaching we can't survive without the federal government. How about we realize that we survived a really long time before the federal government even existed? Can we at least recognize that one? And then to say that just simply because Joe the plumber, our next door neighbor, or let's put it this way, John the rancher is irresponsible, can't manage his own land, but John the rancher is going to run for office and he's going to go be a federal representative. Now all of a sudden, the same guy who couldn't manage his land, now that he's a federal representative, he is somehow magically transformed into something he wasn't before because he's now in office? Or maybe John the rancher now wears a federal BLM badge. Now all of a sudden, because he has a federal badge on his chest, he is now more qualified to manage his land than he was when he was just John the rancher. Does anybody realize how that doesn't even logically compute? Let's see about this thing. We're going to ask ourselves some really simple questions. Let me ask you this question. Which came first, the states or the federal government?
State.
I want to see if everybody agrees with that. Which came first, the states or the federal government?
State.
All right. Now see, if we actually believed that to be true, the federal government wouldn't be exercising the power over the states that they do. Because by natural law and the laws of primacy, who comes first is in charge. So let's look at how much first the states were, because we don't teach that quite accurate anymore. We teach in our schools that our states became independent from Great Britain with the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. You know, those bunch of rogue, anarchist, elite, rich guys who wanted to throw off their government so that they could oppress the people of their choice. Only that's not true. Our states became independent of Great Britain on July 2nd, 1776, with the ratification of the Lee Resolution. The Lee Resolution, a three-step process to becoming free from Great Britain, was debated, voted 76. Our separation from Great Britain was a matter of law. A legally binding congressional act that's just as legally binding as anything our Congress does today that's constitutional. So if we understand that our states existed on July 2nd, then we must admit that our states existed prior to what? Everything else. By the way, John Adams was so excited about July 2nd that on July 3rd that he wrote home to his wife Abigail and said, July 2nd will be an epic day where Americans will celebrate their independence forever. Do you know it wasn't until the mid-1800s that we started celebrating our independence on July 4th? So we must admit that our states existed prior to the Declaration of Independence by 2 days. Now let me ask you something. Is there a federal government on July 2nd? No, we just threw it off. Is there a federal government on July 4th? No. What are the only governments that exist on July 4th? The states. Our first federal government comes through the Articles of Confederation. They didn't work out so well, though. Not probably for the reasons that you were taught, however. Because one of the problems in our education system in America, same as our political system, is that we have become overrun by people that I call federal supremacists. These are these people that believe that the federal government is superior to the states in all cases. They may say that federal law always trumps state law. They may say that we must go to the Supreme Court for every problem and every dispute and every interpretation of the Constitution. Either way you slice it, that is a federal supremacy. They are in all branches of government. They are in all political parties, liberal, conservative, and midstream. And in our conservative groups, we have federal supremacists teaching that our Articles of Confederation failed because our founders created a federal government that was too small and didn't have enough power. That's what some of our conservative educational outlets are teaching. Do you know what that implies, right? That the Constitution that we have now created a bigger federal government with more power. Only that's not true. It is true that the Articles of Confederation had to be fixed. But it was because the federal government didn't have enough guidance to do what they were supposed to do. One of the biggest problems, the biggest problem that drove them to finally decide to create a new delegation, was a problem with treaties. The federal government was writing inequitable treaties. They were making treaties where one state or one set of states had to foot all the bill, and another state or another set of states got all the benefit. And the states who were required to foot the bill were like, whoa, wait a minute. That's not why we joined up in this union, to transfer our prosperity from one state to another. That's not what general welfare means. So we're not paying. Now here's the problem. A treaty is a contract with a foreign country that has no idea how we're supposed to work. So when we have states refusing to foot the bill, we're breaking a contract with a foreign country. Not only that, the states who are supposed to get all the benefit are mad at the states who won't pay. So we're on the verge of war with foreign countries for broken contracts. We're on the verge of war between the states for inequitable treaties, and we just got started. So Congress says, we got to pull together a new delegation. We're going to amend these articles. But they don't amend them. They replace them with our new Constitution, why our Constitution is called the More Perfect Union, because it was supposed to be more perfect than the other one. Now let me ask you this question as we're looking at this timeline. We agree there's no federal government on July 2nd, no federal government on July 4th. We have a federal government through the Articles of Confederation. But let me ask you this very important question. When we dissolved the Articles of Confederation to ratify our new Constitution, what happened to the federal government that was formed by the Articles of Confederation? I need to hear that a little bit louder out there. It's gone. So the period of time between the dissolving of the Articles of Confederation and the ratifying of the Constitution, what are the only governments that exist? The states. 13 years of states. Living, breathing people, managing their land, taking care of their businesses, raising their children before we even have the federal government that we have today. Amazing, isn't it? So now let's discover, we know how long the states existed prior to the federal government. Let's discover once again, rediscover, what is a state? A state is defined and described by the Declaration of Independence as follows. This is the last paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, which, by the way, is taken from the first clause of the Lee Resolution, that legislative act that created our states. It says, "We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare." See, we didn't become independent on July 4th. We published and declared what we had done 2 days prior. That these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. Now, we have just learned what a state is not. A state is not a colony, right? Because if a state was synonymous with colony, then there'd be no point in making the distinction. So what's the difference between a colony and a state? Very simply, a colony is not free and independent. If you live in a colony, you must seek permission and guidance from the federal government before you can manage your land. You must seek permission and guidance from the federal government before you can use your resources. You must seek permission and guidance from the federal government before you can educate your people, make certain laws, regulate your businesses. Anybody feeling like they live in a colony? Well, here's the good news. You don't live in a colony. You live in a state that is free and independent. So we know we are not a colony, but what are we? Continuing with the Declaration of Independence, it tells us exactly what we are. It says, these free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the what? State of what? State of Great Britain. That word state is not simply synonymous with New Hampshire, Rhode Island, or Virginia. That word state is synonymous with Great Britain, France, and Germany. We created 13 independent, free, sovereign governments, just like France, Spain, or Great Britain. Now look, it gets even better because it tells us more specifically who we are. Because if we don't know who we are, how do we take a stand to defend what we should be? Right? So now we're continuing. That as free and independent states, they have, what do they have? Full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states like Great Britain, France, or Spain may of right do. Is there a federal government on July 4th?
Nope.
Who are the only governments that could be receiving this power?
States.
The states. This is who Oregon is today. This is the power you hold, present tense, because nothing has changed. The only thing that has changed is this. Now, your federal supremacist friend, love him as you may try to tell you that doesn't apply to Oregon because Oregon wasn't part of the first 13. Only that's not historically accurate, legally accurate, or constitutionally accurate. There's a doctrine called the equal footing doctrine that says every state that enters the Union enters on the same footing as the first 13. And hey, Oregon, here's your footprint. And any other state that's represented here today. Somebody might try to tell you, well, that may be who Oregon was when you formed Oregon as a state, but when you entered into the Union, you surrendered your power. Really? No. The Constitution says the power is not delegated. How many does that sound familiar to? The 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states. Are the words delegate and surrender, are they synonymous? Are you sure? Well, now give yourselves a hand. You now know more than the Supreme Court of the United States. And probably your favorite law professor. I have read Supreme Court opinions written by Justice Antonin Scalia that said the states surrendered power. That is not true. It is not only constitutionally inaccurate, legally accurate, historically accurate, it's politically ridiculous. How many of you have heard of a sovereign government by the name of Germany? Okay, some of you haven't heard of Germany. All right, so we all agree. Didn't Germany join the European Union? So let's all buy plane tickets. We'll fly over to Germany. We'll have a big town hall meeting, and we'll explain to the German people and their chancellor that they are no longer a sovereign government because they joined the EU. How do you think the Germans are going to take that little bit of news? You're laughing because you know it's ridiculous, but here's the question. Why do the people of Oregon buy it then? Oregon and every other state in this union was created with greater sovereignty than Germany could ever imagine, because our states were created under the fundamental principle that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Germany was created under the principle that kings give rights and privileges. We were created with greater sovereignty, and yet we accept greater servitude. How does that happen? Because we have been teaching the wrong things for a very long time. The next step in our laying our foundation and building our building blocks is understanding. We know when the states and the federal government were formed. We know what a state actually is. Now we need to understand what is the Constitution. Legally speaking, the Constitution is a contract. It is a legally binding contract. But it's even better than that, because the founders, when they write about our Constitution, they don't call it a contract. They call it a compact, which is even better. It tells us even more specifically what the Constitution is, helps us understand how it's supposed to work. Because you see, a contract is a legally binding agreement between legally sovereign people. When I say legally sovereign, I mean they've achieved the age of legal status. Can your 15-year-old make a legally binding contract? No, because they're not legally sovereign in the eyes of the law. They're still subject to their parents. But the Constitution is not a contract because our framers call it a compact, which is even better. Because a compact is not an agreement between legally sovereign people. It is an agreement between legally sovereign governments. Let's go connect our dots. What were the only sovereign governments that existed prior to the creation of our Constitution? The states. That means if the Constitution, as our framers called it, is a compact, the agreement between legally sovereign governments, that means that our states are the creators of the compact. The states are the creators of our Constitution. They are, legally speaking, the parties to the contract. Now here's the funny thing. You will find people that will dispute this and tell you that the Constitution is an agreement between the people and the federal government. That is not true. As a matter of fact, if you have ever read anything that Patrick Henry said, you would know that that was one of his major contentions with the language of the Constitution. He said, this document says, we the people. What do you mean, we the people? We the people did not vote for this. The Constitution cannot be an agreement between the people and the federal government. And you can prove that with one simple fact. Let me ask you this question. Was the Constitution ratified by popular vote? No. How was the Constitution ratified? by the states. 3/4 of the states had to ratify for the Constitution to become a legally binding compact. Somebody might try to tell you that the Constitution is an agreement between the states and the federal government. Our federal supremacist friends are always trying to do that because they want to make the states and the federal government co-equal, because then it's just one step away from being superior. But to say that the Constitution is an agreement between the states and the federal government is a temporal impossibility. Think about this. The federal government did not exist until the Constitution was ratified. How many of you remember from your civics class that there was a very precarious moment when we didn't have enough states to ratify? Anybody remember being taught that? If we had not ratified the Constitution, what would have happened to the federal government? It wouldn't exist. The federal government is the product of the Constitution. You cannot be a party to the contract if you are the product of the contract. You cannot sign the contract into legal being if you do not exist until the contract is signed. Anybody see that? So after proper deduction, the only conclusion that remains is that the states are the creators of the Constitution. And since we know that the states are the creators of the Constitution, then we must admit that the states are the creators of the central government, right? But if we believed that, there'd be no way we could have a federal government to exercise power over us, because in natural law we know that it is abomination, it is against natural law for the creation to be superior to the creator. The states, in creating the federal government, enumerated its specific powers, created a limited and defined central government, and then they did the most important thing they could have ever done. They reserved all other powers to themselves. Now the question we must ask in our who, what, where, when, why laying foundation is, what power went where? We know that we delegated some power to the federal government. We know that we reserved some power to the states. So what went where? Is there power sort of floating around in the ether somewhere, waiting for somebody to claim it? Well, I got good news. You don't have to wait for the Supreme Court to come to a decision. The father of our Constitution, James Madison, already told us. This is a document Madison wrote we call Federalist 45. He says, the powers delegated. Now, this is a really important word. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and, look at that, defined. He doesn't say few and left to the interpretation of the Supreme Court. He doesn't say few and left to the creation of new congressional acts. He says few and defined. Those that remain in the states are numerous and indefinite. Now look at this. He says the former, the powers delegated to the federal government, will be exercised principally on external objects, and then he names them: war, peace, negotiation, foreign commerce. Let's go connect some dots. How many of you remember seeing those powers listed somewhere else just a minute ago? Somebody shout out where we saw that. In the Declaration of Independence, right? War, peace, negotiation, commerce, do all other acts and things. Who owns this power right here? Well, Madison says that this power was delegated to the federal government. So if this power belonged to the states first, who is delegating power to the federal government? The states. But if we believed that and had a dictionary, there is no way we could have the federal government operating the way it does. Look at the definition of the word delegate. A temporary trust of responsibility or authority from a higher power to a lower power. We've just all admitted that the states delegated power to the federal government. By the definition of the word delegate, that means the states are the higher power, and the federal government is the lower power. Isn't that amazing? says the powers not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states and to the people respectively. What powers are reserved to the states? Well, Madison, our father of our Constitution, tells us in the Federalist 45. He says the powers reserved, this is also a very important word, reserved, to the several states. Now that word several doesn't mean a few, so don't let them confuse you on that, meaning only 13. That word several is short for, is a term for severed, meaning separate and independent. And so he says, the powers reserved to the several states will extend to all. Oops, all. What's the word all mean? Just making sure. We haven't changed. I know we have a government that likes to redefine the meaning of the word is. Okay? I'm just checking that all still means all, right? So the powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concerns the lives, liberties, and properties of the people, and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. What about the EPA, the FDA, and the BLM? That's Bureau of Land Management, by the way, not Black Lives Matter. Wouldn't that be the properties of the people? What about the Department of Education, the HHS, the USDA, the FDA? Wouldn't that be the lives of the people? What about the FBI, the DHS, the FCC, the SEC, the FAA, the ATF, the DOE, or whatever you want to call them, all these agencies today? Wouldn't that be the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the states? There you have it. Reserved to the states. There's nothing floating out in the ether. It has been specifically delegated, or it is reserved to the states. How did we get to this point? Because we decided that judges and politicians know more than we possibly know. Sometimes when they get elected, some great white dove lands on their head and departs Joe the plumber with all he needs to know about interpreting the Constitution. Because we forgot the meaning of the word reserved. Remember in 1799 we were having problems with the federal government. We're having problems with the federal government again in 1830. It's a period of history called the Great Debate of 1830. And Calhoun is going to help us understand the importance of the term reserved. He says the doctrine which denies the states the right of protecting their reserved powers. Now that is a very bold statement for Calhoun to step up and say, your states have a right to do anything. Because governments get power. People have rights. Why would the states have a right? Well, let's notice that it's a little r right, not a big R right, which a big R right is an inalienable right, a natural law right. But their right to protect their reserved powers stems from the definition of that word, reserved. So let's look at this for a second. Let's pretend there's a chair up here, and on the chair is a sign that says, reserved to KrisAnne Hall. If someone else sits in that chair, what do I have the right to do? Kick them out. If that chair has a reserve sign on it, and I don't have the right to kick somebody out, is the chair really reserved? No. And that's exactly what Calhoun is saying. He's saying, look, if the states do not have the right to protect what we reserve to them, then what you must admit is that it is the federal government now with the right to determine solely, exclusively, and finally the limits of its own power. Because all the federal government has to do is say, hey, we're going to do education today and you just got to like it. We're going to manage your land and you just got to like it. If they don't have the right to protect what's been reserved to them, are they sovereign? They're just colonies. Now let's go back and connect a dot, a really, really important dot. What kind of document is the Constitution? It's a compact. A compact is an agreement between what? Sovereign governments. If the states are not sovereign, can they make a legally binding contract? No. So if all we have to do is just simply lie down and accept whatever the federal government has has to say about their own power, then we are not sovereign, we are colonies, which makes the Constitution an illegal document with no legal foundation, and it is dissolved, which means if the Constitution is dissolved, then our union is dissolved, and we are not a constitutional republic, but a totalitarian kingdom where the only limit to the federal government is its own desires and will. Here's the good news. The states are sovereign. The Constitution is legally binding. We are a constitutional republic, and the federal government is still legally insubmission to the states. And the only thing that needs to change is this, right here. A revolution of the mind. Because look at this word, reserved. To exercise dominion over something to the exclusion of all others. When we delegated power to the states in their creations on July 2nd, we said to the states, this is your power, and you have ownership over this power. It is your property to exclude everyone else. And when the states then created the federal government through the Constitution, they said, hey, we're going to delegate to our lower power a certain amount of our authority, and we're going to keep and protect the rest for ourselves. And that's what it means to be a constitutional republic. You live where the states are sovereign because the people created them that way. Where the states are the higher power and the federal government is the lower power. And we have temporarily entrusted the federal government with certain duties. And we have control over our employees. Gotta remember who we are, or there's no place to stand. How do you stand and defend your liberty if we cannot understand the greatest protector of our liberty is this check of the states on the federal government? Look at what Jefferson says. He says, whenever the federal government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. That is a very powerful thing. Let's look at this by way of analogy. My friend Debbie is sitting there on the front row, so I'm going to pick on her. Let's pretend that I've just stolen Debbie's car. Do I have the authority to drive Debbie's car? Do I have the authority to sell Debbie's car? If I sell Debbie's car, is it a legally binding sale? No. Why? Because the power has not been legally delegated to me, which means any act that I exercise over her vehicle is unauthoritative and it's void and of no force. Does Debbie have to sue me to get her car back? Absolutely not. She simply provides the title deed to the local officials. They have to present the car to her as the rightful owner of the vehicle. If I actually sold the car, the poor guy who bought it from me is the one who has to fight through the legal system for restitution to get money from me, not from her. Now here's the application question. Do the states have to sue the federal government to get their power back? No, they do not. Not only the states suing the federal government to get their power back is unnecessary, it's dangerous and ridiculous. The states suing the federal government to get their power back is like Debbie suing me to get her car back, showing up in court and finding out that the judge and the jury are all my family members. Right? Because the states are suing the federal government where? In federal court with judges that are appointed by? Come on now. That's not complicated. That's a stacked courtroom. Not only that, if the states are suing the federal government to get their power back, then they must submit to the fact that the federal government is the ultimate decider of the limits of their own power. And if the federal government says, no, I'm sorry, we believe our power is this today, then the only result that remains, the only option option that remains for the state is to just simply lay prostrate before the oligarchy and beg for mercy. See, all the states need to do is assert the title deed to their power. What is the title deed to their power? The Constitution. What we need to know, we need to change, is if the federal government uses power outside the Constitution, it is stealing power from the states. And it has no authority. Now, sometimes your federal supremacists will say, and I've had this come up all the time, I have actually, where are my attorney friends? Okay. So I had a legislator say to me, yeah, but what about adverse possession? You're laughing, right? I said, well, adverse possession is a term of law. We actually have a legal definition for adverse possession and a legal allowance for adverse possession under specific terms. Can you show me in the Constitution where it legally establishes that the federal government can take power from the states as long as they can exercise it long enough without the states noticing? Does that sound ridiculous? See, there's a difference here that we need to come to terms with. A difference between legal authority and assumed authority. We're going to change the dynamics of our little analogy here to help us understand that a little bit better. We're going to pretend that Debbie has left on a vacation to the Bahamas for 3 weeks. She's very happy about that. The day she leaves for her vacation, I steal her car. So she's gone 3 weeks. She doesn't know I stole her car. I drive around for 3 weeks in Debbie's car. Everybody who sees me drive around in Debbie's car thinks that I have the legal authority to drive her car. Why? Because nobody's objected. They assume that I have the authority to drive her car. Does that make me have a legal authority because everybody thinks I do? No. Debbie comes home from her vacation, finds out that I stole her car, steps up and says, hey, you stole my car, I'm taking the keys back. See, that's what needs to happen in our states. We need to wake up and realize that the federal government has stolen our power, and we just must simply step up and assert our ownership and demand for the return of that power. Because just because they've been using it for 150 years doesn't mean they rightfully own it. What are our states supposed to be doing? We heard it come up here earlier. It's called interposition. What do? They're supposed to interpose. They're supposed to step directly in between the federal government and the rights of the people and say, no, you cannot exercise that power here, and you will not be allowed to exercise that power here because we will not comply. Look what Madison says. He says that the states have the right to interpose, but he says not only that, they have a duty to interpose. Why do they have a can we all agree that a duty is greater than a right? We know we have a right to interpose because the powers are reserved, but why do they have a duty? Well, let's look at this. The Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. The only reason we created the government of the states, or any government, is to secure our rights. And when our states fail to step up to the federal government keep them in their defined, limited powers, they are failing to accomplish the only reason they exist. Because securing our rights means we must have a limited and defined federal government. So when your state legislator says, well, you know, we can't oppose federal law, we can't do that, or we can't do this, then the next question out of your mouth should be, then why do we have you? Why do we even have state government? Why do we even have legislators? Why do we have an attorney general? Why do we have a governor if you're just going to admit that we're nothing but subjects of a colony? Because it's their job to keep you free men in a republic. How do they do Jefferson says nullification. Nullification, look what he says. The several states who formed the Constitution being what? Sovereign and independent. Don't forget that independent part, because there are people who will say that if Oregon is going to oppose the federal government, you must have 39 other states to agree with you or you can't oppose them. If you have to wait around for another state to agree with you, are you sovereign? Are you independent? No. And that it's nullification by those sovereignties. Who are the sovereignties? The states. What is nullification? It's simply saying, we will not comply. Can we try that together? We will not comply. Felt good, didn't it? That was God giving us a punctuation mark. See, it's not complicated. It's a matter of ownership. It's a matter of who possesses what and to what limit. Now, there are a bunch of different arguments against nullification, and we don't have time to go through them today. Some people try to tell you that the Supreme Court has ruled that the states can't nullify, and therefore they can't, which is really interesting because we've got to change the way we think about things. Can I just help us out here? Courts don't issue rulings. Kings issue rulings. Courts offer opinions. And a court's opinion is only binding under two circumstances. Number one, a court's opinion is only binding on the people in the courtroom, because otherwise it would be law. Courts can't issue law. If a court issues a law, that's a direct violation of separation of powers and a per se violation of the Constitution. Not only is a court's opinions only binding on the people in the courtroom, they're only binding on the people in the courtroom if they're consistent with the Constitution. So if they're inconsistent with the Constitution under Article 6, Section 2, then they're not binding on anybody at all. And when your federal supremacist friend tries to tell you that we must obey the Supreme Court, I want to ask them, this Supreme Court? The Supreme Court that said Dred Scott could not be a citizen of the United States because he was a black man? That Supreme Court? Or perhaps this Supreme Court? The Supreme Court that said that we could arrest and indefinitely detain American citizens, men, women, and children for 4 years just so we could feel safe. That Supreme Court, that's the one that we're supposed to trust with our rights and our liberties? See, we got to think about these things. Because look what Jefferson said. The great object of my fear is the federal judiciary. That body like gravity ever acting with noiseless foot and unalarming advance, gaining ground step by step and holding what it gains, is engulfing insidiously in the special governments into the jaws of that which feeds them. The government will become as venal and oppressive as the government from which we separated. By the way, just in case your federal supremacist or your judicial supremacist friend has forgotten, this Supreme Court justice, who's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, already said nullification is how you should be responding to the federal government. This is Justice Roberts' opinion in the first Affordable Care Act opinion. He says, we look to the states to defend their prerogatives by adopting the simple expedient of not yielding to the federal blandishments when they do not want to embrace federal policies as their own. And then look what he says. The states are separate and independent sovereigns, and they have to act like it. Hey, Oregon, isn't it about time you start acting like it? Well, I just want us to realize a few things. as we close up here today. Government is not defined by the Constitution, then why do we have one? If they can just make it up as they go along, then why do we even have a Constitution? If the federal government is not limited in its power by the Constitution, then what is the limit of the federal government's power? Because then we remember, once again, how many branches of government did we create? Legislative, executive, and judicial. If part of the whole, any part of the whole, can define the power of the whole, then what is the limit of the whole's power? Nothing but itself. What controls the federal government? The states. Nullification is not the states acting unlawfully, by the way. Nullification is the states enforcing the supreme law of the land when the federal government is acting lawlessly. And we need to start enforcing the law. Now here's the warning from Jefferson. The states must stand. Are you catching a theme here? The states must stand. When all government, domestic and foreign, in as little as great things, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided of one government on another. Did you notice he said one government on another? He didn't say one branch on another. He said one government on another. Which government's supposed to be checking the other? The states, the creators of the federal government, are supposed to be checking their creation so that the creation cannot become superior to the creator. The lower power should never consume the higher power. And if it does, look what he says. If the states look with apathy on this silent descent of their government into the gulf which is to swallow all, we have only to weep over the human character formed uncontrollable but by a rod of iron. You see, the greatest gift that our framers gave to us was not liberty, because God gave that to us. The greatest gift that our framers gave to us was the ability to the opportunity to self-govern. You see, they didn't just declare independence from Great Britain, they declared independence from kings forever. And the greatest condemnation on America today is our refusal to self-govern. Now, we didn't get to go through all of these things. I want to prepare you as much as I can. The book on the back table that I have there, Sovereign Duty, has this class in it. It also has a class on the constitutional sheriff. It has a class on the Second and Fourth Amendments. It will teach you about nullification. It will teach you about the states. It will give you the tools necessary to stand when you find a federal supremacist that tells you, no, you can't stand against the federal government. Putting the tools in your hands. That's what we want to do today. It has nullification, it has Article 5 Convention in there, and it has everything that you need to know how to defend the sovereignty of the state. Now, I am very disappointed that I did not have this video working for you, because I was going to let Lavoy finish out the class for me and just simply reiterate that you must stand. Because you see, how many of you want your states to stand against the federal government? Who are the states? Your state will not stand against the federal government until you stand individually. We got to stop waiting for people to become our leaders. We got to stop waiting for somebody to fix our problems, and we must stand ourselves. Why? Because our children deserve a whole lot better than what we have today. And they certainly deserve a whole lot better than the direction we're heading in. And by the way, if we had stood together, can I just be really bold and brazen here today? If we had stood together from the beginning, it wouldn't have just been those men at the refuge. there would have been nobody arrested at the refuge. If you're waiting for Congress to fix this, why hasn't Congress impeached Anna Brown? Why hasn't Congress demanded that these agencies drop the charges on these men?
How did Governor Brown get back?
And we have 4 or 5 executive orders already written by our new president. Why haven't these men been pardoned? Now, I'm not casting stones at anybody. I'm just trying to tell us that if we are going to fix this, we've got to understand that the onus is on us and not waiting for somebody else to do what we need to do ourselves. So I just want to thank you for your time. I want to thank the Finicum family. You've given the most ultimate of sacrifice. You've given us an example of standing. And if we don't stand, are we really saying that this family should have to sacrifice more than the rest of us? Are we really saying that these people don't deserve the comfort and ease that we deserve? Or are we just saying that the Finicum family loves liberty and their children more than we do? Because that's really the only conclusions that you can draw. We have the power. We've always had it. We have the means. We've always had it. We just need to change this.